There's a question most people never dare to ask out loud. What if religion isn't just mistaken? What if it's a scam? Not necessarily in the cartoonish sense of a guy twirling his mustache and counting money, but in the deeper sense. A system built to extract belief, obedience, and resources from people under false promises. When we call something a scam, we mean it sells hope that it can't actually deliver. It convinces people to trade their time, money, and even their sense of reality for something that exists only in words. By that definition, religion fits uncomfortably well. Most religions claim to offer the ultimate reward: eternal life, cosmic justice, reunion with loved ones, or endless peace. But none of them can prove any of it. There's no evidence, no demonstration, not even a consistent account between faiths. And yet billions are convinced that if they follow the rules, say the right prayers, and give enough devotion, they'll be rewarded after death. If any other business promised invisible rewards after you die, in exchange for your loyalty, your money, and your conformity, we'd call it a scam instantly. Religion's brilliance is psychological. It doesn't need evidence because it works through emotion. Fear, guilt, and hope are powerful currencies. They're the oldest marketing tools in human history. People want to believe there's meaning, justice, and life beyond the grave. Religion sells exactly that, tailor-made to human insecurity. The fear of death is unbearable for most people, so religion transforms it into a story of comfort. You're not really dying. You're going somewhere better. Who wouldn't want to believe that? It's not that every priest or preacher consciously lies. Most of them sincerely believe what they say. But sincerity doesn't make the system any less deceptive. A Ponzi scheme can be run by people who truly think it works. The structure itself is what matters. Religion is self-reinforcing. It rewards faith and punishes doubt, praises obedience, and labels questioning as sinful. The moment you start to ask for evidence, the system deflects. You're told that faith is a virtue, that doubt is dangerous, that logic can't grasp divine truth. Those are perfect defense mechanisms for any belief that can't stand scrutiny. Religion also plays a long game. It doesn't just sell beliefs, it sells identity. From childhood, you're told who you are, what you must believe, and what happens if you don't. Your family, community, and moral worth become entangled with faith. To question religion becomes like betraying your tribe. That's how scams protect themselves, by making disbelief personally costly. The economic side is no small matter either. Religious institutions accumulate wealth on a massive scale. Tax exemptions, donations, tithes, pilgrimages, fundraising drives. The Vatican, for example, owns billions in real estate and investments. Televangelists in the US fly private jets funded by people who barely afford groceries. In poorer countries, prosperity preachers promise that giving to the church will make you rich. A cruel irony, when it's the preachers who always end up rich. It's not spirituality, it's business, dressed in sacred language, and it's a business immune to consumer protection laws. You can't sue a religion for false advertising because its claims aren't materially verifiable. That's the loophole. Promising heaven or divine favor is legally untouchable because it can't be tested. It's the perfect scam. No product, no accountability, and infinite customers. But what really makes religion enduring is that it provides meaning where life feels meaningless. People don't just want comfort, they want purpose. Religion steps in with ready-made answers. Why we're here, what we must do, who's in charge. It simplifies chaos into a story. In times of fear, suffering, or loss, that story becomes irresistible. Even if it's not true, it feels necessary. And so the cycle continues. Belief sustained by emotional need, not evidence. Many believers argue that even if religion isn't true, it still does good. It gives people morals, hope, and community. But here's the problem. You can get all those things without deception. We don't need myths to be good or kind. We don't need ancient books to tell us compassion is valuable. Humanity figured out empathy long before organized religion claimed it as a trademark. In fact, much of religious morality was built around tribal survival, not universal kindness, and often it justified cruelty in the name of righteousness. When people say, religion can't be a scam, it helps people, they miss the core issue. Something can be emotionally useful and still be false. Cigarettes relieve stress too, that doesn't make them good for you. A comforting illusion is still an illusion. Throughout history, religion has repeatedly positioned itself as the gatekeeper of truth, but always without evidence. From divine kingships to miracle claims, it relies on authority rather than verification. Believe this because it's written. Obey because it's holy. That mindset doesn't evolve, it only adapts. Today, it's not as much about thunder gods and fire from the sky, but the underlying psychology hasn't changed. People still crave certainty. Religion still sells it. And whenever doubt threatens the system, the defenders cry persecution. The faithful are taught that questioning religion is immoral or dangerous, a strategy as old as belief itself. By turning skepticism into sin, religion protects its most vulnerable point, the absence of proof. That's what keeps it functioning generation after generation. Not evidence, but emotional conditioning. It's easy to assume religion survives because it's ancient and respected. But history shows it survives because it evolved like any profitable idea, by learning how to hold people. Every major religion today is the result of centuries of refinement, power struggles, and psychological fine-tuning. The rituals, the chants, the architecture, all designed to create awe, to trigger emotion, to make belief feel sacred instead of manipulated. The more you look at it, the more religion resembles a system optimized for influence, a network that feeds on devotion, funded by fear, powered by repetition, not necessarily out of malice, just efficiency. Once you understand that, the question isn't whether religion started as a scam, it's whether it can ever stop being one. When we talk about religion as a possible scam, we're not accusing every believer of being gullible, or every preacher of being corrupt. The problem isn't necessarily the individuals. It's the system that conditions people to accept extraordinary claims without evidence, and to see that as a virtue. That's what makes it so powerful and so difficult to challenge. It's not just a belief structure. It's a psychological architecture built to protect itself. Every religion creates an internal logic that justifies its own existence. If the prayers aren't answered, the believer is told it's a test of faith. If something good happens, it's proof that God is listening. If something bad happens, it's part of his mysterious plan. It's a closed loop. Every possible outcome reinforces belief. That's how scams work. They reinterpret every event to keep you invested. There's no scenario where you're allowed to conclude, maybe it's not true. The emotional blackmail runs deep. Many people stay religious not because they're convinced, but because they're afraid of being wrong. The threat of eternal punishment, the idea that doubt could lead to infinite suffering, is one of the most extreme psychological weapons ever conceived. Imagine how many people genuinely fear questioning their own religion, not because of logic, but because of terror. That fear alone keeps billions locked into systems that thrive on their submission, and that fear is taught early. Religion knows that the human mind is most malleable when it's young. That's why almost no one independently discovers their religion as an adult. They inherit it. A child is told that their faith is the ultimate truth, that everyone else's beliefs are false, and that the consequences of disbelief are catastrophic. It's not education, it's programming. Once implanted, those beliefs sink deep into identity, making them extremely hard to unlearn. The scam works best when the victim doesn't even realize they're being sold something. Of course, religion doesn't just sell fear, it sells belonging. Humans are social creatures. We crave connection and shared meaning. Religion capitalizes on that by offering a ready-made tribe, a group where you're accepted as long as you conform. And conformity, once reinforced by social approval, feels like moral certainty. That's why even intelligent, educated people can stay in religious systems that don't make sense to them intellectually. The cost of leaving, losing community, love, or family often feels higher than the cost of pretending. This is another aspect that makes religion unique among scams. It traps people not only emotionally but socially. Leaving a religion often means being ostracized or condemned. Apostates in some cultures face violence or death. In others, they're quietly erased from social circles. That's not an accident, it's a feature. Systems survive by punishing defection. If a friend leaves a pyramid scheme, you might lose a recruit. But if someone leaves a religion, the system treats it as a threat to its entire credibility. so it defends itself by labeling the doubter as broken, immoral, or lost. The tragedy is that most people trapped in religious thinking aren't malicious. They're sincere. They truly believe they're protecting truth, not realizing they're maintaining a centuries-old structure designed to protect itself. The ancient creators of these systems might not have known psychology in modern terms, but they understood human behavior deeply. They knew people fear death, crave order, and respond to authority. They built entire civilizations on those instincts. If you look at history, you can see religion evolving the same way technology does, adapting to new threats, upgrading its strategies, rebranding its message. When science started explaining natural phenomena, religion shifted focus from the physical world to the spiritual. When morality evolved beyond ancient laws, religion reframed itself as a guide for personal meaning. When its political power waned, it moved into hearts and minds. That's how it survived every revolution of thought, not by being true, but by being adaptable. Modern religions often act like PR campaigns for ancient myths. They polish the language, add emotional music, and focus on self-help themes. You'll hear sermons about finding peace, gratitude, purpose, all noble ideas. But they're wrapped in the same unverifiable assumptions. God still loves you, heaven still awaits, sin still threatens, and faith still trumps evidence. The packaging changes, the promises don't. It's the same old pitch in a modern voice, and yet billions keep buying it. Why? Because religion isn't just something people believe, and it's something they feel. It operates in the emotional layer of the brain, not the rational one. When someone feels awe in a cathedral, or peace while praying, they interpret it as proof of the divine. But those are human experiences, biochemical responses to ritual, repetition, music, and collective emotion. Neuroscience shows that religious ecstasy and deep meditation activate the same parts of the brain that respond to art, love, and beauty. The feeling is real. The story attached to it isn't. Religious institutions know how to harness those feelings. The architecture, the incense, the chanting, all engineered to overwhelm the senses and dissolve individuality into the group. That's what gives religion its illusion of transcendence. It's not divine. It's designed. Just like casinos manipulate lighting and music to keep people gambling, churches manipulate atmosphere to keep people believing. The difference is intent. One sells luck, the other sells salvation. Some argue that religion isn't a scam because its leaders don't always profit personally. But that misses the broader mechanism. The profit doesn't have to be financial. It can be social, psychological, or political. Power is its own currency. Religious institutions have always sought influence over minds, laws, and governments. When you control belief, you control behavior. And when you control behavior, you control everything else. The promise of eternal reward becomes the ultimate leverage. People will obey any rule, commit any act, endure any suffering if they believe it leads to divine approval. History is full of examples. Crusades fought in the name of God. Witch trials justified by Scripture. Holy wars, divine monarchies, inquisitions, forced conversions, all wrapped in the sacred language of salvation. Billions have suffered under systems claiming moral authority from invisible beings. If you strip away the religious branding, what remains is exploitation on a massive scale of minds, bodies, and resources. Yet religion keeps presenting itself as benevolent. It claims to be the source of morality, the foundation of civilization, the guardian of goodness. But morality doesn't come from religion. Religion comes from morality. Humans evolved empathy because it helped us survive. Cooperation and fairness are ancient instincts. Religion simply codified them and took credit. And then, ironically, it twisted those instincts to justify exclusion. Love thy neighbor, but only if he believes what you believe. Be compassionate, but condemn the heretic. It's moral marketing, the appearance of goodness masking systems of control. The scam isn't always in the money. It's in convincing people that their worth depends on invisible approval, that they need an institution to speak to the universe on their behalf, that guilt and shame are holy emotions. It's in the idea that humans are born broken and must spend their lives seeking forgiveness for simply being human. That message, "You are flawed, but we can fix you," is the same tactic used by every manipulative enterprise in history. Religion just perfected it, and the more people give in, the more they defend it. Faith creates sunk costs. When you've spent years praying, donating, and organizing your life around a belief, admitting it might be false feels unbearable. The mind resists it, because it means accepting that your sacrifices, your fears, your devotions were for nothing. That's not easy to face. So the believer doubles down, clinging even harder to the illusion. That's why religions survive even when debunked, not because they're true, but because humans can't stand the pain of being wrong about something sacred. The genius of religion is that it convinces people to police themselves. It doesn't need constant enforcement, because it plants guilt deep enough that believers enforce the system internally. A person doesn't need to be watched by a priest when they believe an invisible being sees every thought. That's ultimate surveillance, not through cameras but through conscience. Religion made people internalize authority so completely that they feel guilt, even when they've done nothing wrong. That's where the idea of sin comes in. In many faiths, you're guilty simply for existing. Before you've even done anything, you're told you were born tainted, in need of forgiveness, redemption, purification. The scam begins before you can resist it. It tells you you're sick and then sells you the cure. And that cure never actually heals you, because guilt is the product that keeps the system running. The more guilt you feel, the more dependent you become. It's a perfect cycle: sin, repent, repeat. And it's not just personal guilt. Religion manufactures collective guilt too. Entire communities are taught to see themselves as chosen or condemned, blessed or cursed, based on stories that predate them by thousands of years. Wars, plagues, or natural disasters are often framed as punishments or tests from the divine. It keeps the focus away from reality, from the actual causes that can be understood and solved, and redirects it into superstition. When a child dies, people are told it's part of God's plan instead of asking hard questions about healthcare, poverty, or negligence. Faith replaces accountability. That deflection is one of the most consistent traits of religious systems. Whenever human suffering could challenge belief, religion shifts the narrative. Evil exists, God's plan. Injustice thrives, you'll be rewarded later. The idea of a scam fits here because it keeps moving the goalpost. No matter how wrong or inconsistent things seem, there's always a new rationalization that keeps you invested. The return on belief is always just out of reach. After death, after judgment, after you've paid enough devotion. Always later, never now. What makes religion such a resilient scam is that it merges comfort with coercion. It gives emotional relief while simultaneously imposing control. You're comforted by the idea that someone's in charge, but you're controlled by the idea that you must obey that someone through the institution that claims to represent them. It's like a contract you never signed but are told you must honor forever. If you refuse, you're punished not by law but by existential fear. That fear can be paralyzing. The concept of hell, for instance, is psychological terrorism. It's the most extreme punishment imaginable, infinite suffering for finite mistakes, and it's often taught to children. Think about that. An idea so horrific that adults wouldn't dare describe it in detail, yet it's used as moral education for kids. It's not moral instruction. It's trauma disguised as spirituality. Once that image of eternal torment gets burned into your imagination, it doesn't leave easily. Even ex-believers often admit they still feel flashes of fear years later. That's how effective the conditioning is. The opposite side of the same coin is heaven, the ultimate prize. It's the bait that makes the punishment tolerable. You're told that obedience and faith will lead to eternal joy. That promise can make people endure anything: poverty, injustice, oppression, because they believe it will all make sense after they die. In that way, religion becomes a tool of control for those in power. It pacifies people by making them content with suffering. Your reward isn't in this life is one of the most efficient ways to stop people from demanding change. And those in power have always known this. Kings claimed divine authority to rule. Empires used religion to justify conquest. Even today, politicians wrap themselves in faith to gain trust. Religious institutions preach humility to the masses while amassing unimaginable wealth and privilege. The scam isn't just spiritual, it's economic and political. It's the art of convincing people that serving authority is serving God. But the system doesn't just exploit fear and authority, it exploits love too. People love their families, their traditions, their communities. Religion fuses itself to those things so completely that rejecting it feels like rejecting your roots. That emotional entanglement makes belief almost impossible to separate from belonging. You can stop believing in a doctrine, but the memories tied to it, the holidays, the songs, the rituals, keep pulling you back. Religion survives through nostalgia as much as faith. That's why even people who no longer believe often still defend religion as cultural heritage. They think of it as harmless tradition. But tradition isn't harmless when it continues to shape moral norms, restrict freedoms, or silence questions. When outdated beliefs about sin and purity still influence laws, education, or sexuality, the damage isn't cultural. It's real. The scam doesn't end at the church door. It bleeds into public life. And yet many hesitate to call it what it is. People say religion can't be a scam. It's sacred. But that's exactly how scams protect themselves, by wrapping themselves in taboo. You can't question it because questioning is framed as disrespect. You can't expose it because disbelief is treated as arrogance. The system labels skepticism as evil precisely because it can't survive scrutiny. Faith thrives in darkness, not because it's profound, but because light kills illusions. Still, the question lingers. Do all religious people know it's a scam? No, in fact, that's what makes it complex. Many are victims and promoters at the same time. A priest may sincerely believe he's helping souls while unknowingly perpetuating manipulation. A parent may teach a child about divine punishment out of love, not cruelty. The deception is systemic, not always intentional. That's what makes it so insidious. It uses good intentions to sustain falsehood. This is why religion can't be dismissed simply as a personal choice. It shapes society's politics and values. It dictates laws about women's rights, education, sexuality, and healthcare. It influences who gets to marry, who gets to live freely, and who gets condemned, all because of unverifiable claims passed down as divine authority. If that's not exploitation, what is? The fact that people don't see it as such only proves how deeply normalized it's become. But to call religion a scam isn't to say it was invented by cartoon villains. It was created by human beings, frightened, curious, imaginative. In the early days, religion probably began as a way to explain the unknown: thunder, death, disease. Over time, those explanations became institutions. And once power entered the equation, honesty left. What started as myth hardened into doctrine, and what began as storytelling turned into control. That's the shift, from seeking truth to selling certainty. The irony is that religion depends on the very qualities it suppresses: curiosity, doubt, imagination. Without those, it wouldn't exist. But once established, it demands you stop using them. It tells you that curiosity is rebellion, that doubt is sin, and that imagination must serve faith, not question it. That's how it survives, by turning the human capacity for wonder into submission. And that brings us back to the question, is religion really a scam? To answer honestly, we have to separate intentions from outcomes. Maybe not every believer is scamming anyone. Maybe not every preacher is consciously deceiving. But if a system collects money, loyalty, and obedience based on promises it can't deliver, if it discourages evidence, silences criticism, and punishes doubt, then functionally, yes, it operates as one. It doesn't matter whether the con artist believes his own story. The effect on the victims is the same. If you want to understand why religion still thrives, even in an age of science and instant information, you have to look at how it evolved. Every successful system learns how to adapt. Religion has done that better than almost anything else in human history. It doesn't resist change, it absorbs it. The language shifts, the tone softens, the symbols modernize, but the underlying structure remains. The promises are still unverifiable, the hierarchy still benefits, and the followers are still conditioned to believe that doubt is weakness. In ancient times, religion controlled the physical world: rain, harvests, fertility, and death. When science took those domains away, It migrated into the emotional and existential. Today, it doesn't compete with meteorology or medicine. It competes with therapy and philosophy. It's not about controlling nature anymore. It's about controlling meaning. The new pitch is psychological rather than supernatural. You need faith to find purpose. That's the modern rebrand. The same product in a more subtle package. The institutions that survive are the ones that learn to sound reasonable. Gone are the fire and brimstone threats in many places. Now you hear sermons about spiritual growth, gratitude, and personal peace. The vocabulary has shifted from punishment to positivity. But underneath, the same structure remains. You're still being told that fulfillment depends on surrendering your mind to invisible authority. It's just marketed as faith-based well-being instead of divine obedience. Religion's new trick is to blend with self-help culture. You see it in motivational sermons, megachurches, and Instagram pastors preaching prosperity in designer clothes. They promise success, not salvation. Yet the mechanism is identical. Believe, donate, trust the process, and your blessings will come. The prosperity gospel is perhaps the most blatant modern example of religion as business. It packages ancient superstition in capitalist language and calls it empowerment. It's no longer give to God. It's invest in your miracle. And millions fall for it because it speaks the language of ambition instead of fear. But even outside of overtly religious circles, the same psychology lingers. Many spiritual but not religious movements replicate the same structure. Gurus, sacred texts, exclusive truths, and promises of enlightenment. The names change, the costumes change, but the pattern doesn't. It's the same cycle of vulnerability and authority, hope and dependence. Humans seem almost hardwired to look for someone who claims to know the secrets of existence. That's why the religious impulse doesn't vanish. It mutates. There's a reason for that. It satisfies psychological needs that are deeply human. People want to feel part of something larger, to believe their suffering has meaning, and to feel that someone, somewhere, understands what they can't. Those are beautiful instincts, but religion exploits them instead of honoring them. It takes the search for understanding and replaces it with submission. It turns curiosity into creed. It sells certainty where only mystery exists. In that way, religion is not just a scam. It's a theft of wonder. And yet many argue that faith brings comfort, that it helps people cope with tragedy. And it does. But comfort doesn't prove truth. A placebo can ease pain even when it contains nothing. Religion functions much the same way. Emotionally effective, intellectually empty. The fact that belief can calm anxiety doesn't make the belief accurate. It just shows how powerful the mind's need for narrative really is. People would rather accept a false answer than face uncertainty. Religion fills that void perfectly. Sociologically, religion persists because it's woven into identity. It's not just something people believe. It's who they are. When your worldview, community, and self-worth all depend on your faith, abandoning it feels like death. That's why arguments rarely change minds. It's not logic that keeps people religious. It's belonging. The scam protects itself by being personal. It's easier to admit you were fooled by a stranger than by something that shaped your entire life. And so religion evolves not to be true, but to be tolerable, trims its sharpest edges whenever society advances. When slavery became indefensible, religions found new interpretations. When science disproved creation myths, they called them metaphors. When equality movements challenged patriarchy, some churches began ordaining women. It's always reactive, never revolutionary. The moral progress we attribute to religion almost always came from people pushing against it. Yet, once society moves forward, religion rewrites itself as if it led the way. It's a survival instinct. A good scam never admits it was wrong, it reinvents itself. It changes the story just enough to stay relevant. That's why religions split and multiply. Every time doubt threatens the foundation, a new version emerges, claiming to be the true one. That's how we ended up with thousands of denominations, each insisting they're right. If divine truth were clear, there wouldn't be endless branches of disagreement. The fragmentation itself is evidence of invention, not revelation. But adaptability also gives religion plausible deniability. When confronted with its crimes, child abuse scandals, discrimination, holy wars, The response is always the same. Those people weren't true believers. It's the no true Scotsman defense, endlessly repeated. The system takes credit for every good act done in faith, but none of the harm. That's not honesty. That's marketing. No corporation would survive if it excused its failures that way. And yet, in modern life, religion hides behind respectability. It's treated as a private matter, immune to criticism. Politicians invoke God to win votes. Schools teach creation myths as alternative viewpoints. And institutions claim tax exemptions because they call themselves spiritual. The scam has gone mainstream, invisible because it's everywhere. The very word faith is treated as a virtue, even though it literally means believing without evidence. In any other context, that would be a red flag. If a stranger told you to invest your savings in a plan you can't verify, you'd laugh them off. But when religion makes the same offer, people bow their heads. This is where the hypocrisy becomes most visible. The same believers who demand evidence for everything in daily life, medicine, science, law, suspend all skepticism when it comes to the most extraordinary claims imaginable. Why? Because religion teaches them that evidence is the enemy of belief. That's what separates it from philosophy or science. It doesn't encourage inquiry. It sanctifies ignorance, not maliciously, but strategically. Ignorance is loyalty. And so even in the 21st century, ancient texts still dictate modern ethics. People still oppose vaccines, contraception, gender equality, and human rights, all in the name of doctrines written in pre-scientific eras. The consequences aren't symbolic. They're tangible. Millions suffer because faith overrides reason, and yet religion claims moral authority as if it's above reproach. That's what makes the scam so successful. It doesn't need to prove anything. It just needs to be believed. At its core, religion survives because it answers emotional needs, not intellectual ones. It doesn't need to convince the brain when it can capture the heart. It offers identity, belonging, and purpose, the three pillars of psychological stability. Take those away and people panic. That's why, even when religion is exposed, it doesn't die. It simply rebrands as spirituality, mindfulness, or a relationship with the universe. The words change. The dependency remains. But there's a difference between genuine spiritual exploration and institutional religion. Wonder and awe are human experiences, not owned by any doctrine. The scam happens when those experiences are monetized, moralized, and monopolized. When someone tells you they have exclusive access to truth, that only through them can you find meaning. You're no longer being guided. You're being sold something. And in that sense, religion isn't just a scam. It's the blueprint for all of them.